right, good morning, everyone. It is just about start time, so we will go ahead and begin. So today's webinar is part of the Tech Tidbits series that is happening through SLA, and we're very lucky to have Hal Kirkwood with us today to take us through an introduction to Slack as a small team communication tool. So Slack, if you are not familiar, is a platform for communication within an organization, and the Sainsbury Library has been using it for communication for over about 4 years. And so this session will cover what it is and some potential ways that it can be used. And Hal will discuss its usage both pre and post-pandemic. A little bit of background information on Hal. Hal is a business librarian at the Sainsbury Library at the Sid Business School in the University of Oxford. And he has been a business librarian for over 25 years with stints at SUNY, Geneseo, and Purdue University. Kirkwood has numerous presentations and publications on concept mapping and business information literacy. He serves on the editorial board of Business Information Review, and he is the current past president of the Special Libraries Association. So with that being said, I will go ahead and turn it over to Hal. Thank you so much.
Sure, thanks, Annette. Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here, and hopefully you'll find this at least mildly interesting. What I will do at this point is share my screen and pop open a PowerPoint so that I can talk and work through a bunch of screenshots so you can see what this is all about. So let's do this. And I'm going to blow the whole thing up so I won't be able to see the camera or the chat. But if you do want to make comments or questions in the chat, go ahead and then we'll catch those later on toward the end. Let's see if I can get this as tiny as possible. There we go. So, as Annette said, I'm Hal Kirkwood. I'm the Bodleian Business Librarian at the Said Business School here at the University of Oxford. I have been here at Oxford since April of 2018. And it's been quite an exciting adventure to jump from Purdue, where I was at, where Annette is now, for 20 years, to come over here to the UK and to work here. And great typo with the spelling of my own last name there. So the Sainsbury Library has been using Slack. Actually, when I double checked with one of my teammates, since around 2014. They started out using just the free version. And it was chosen for a couple of different reasons. One, they wanted to be able to sort of track and monitor conversation. And when I say monitor, I mean maintain threads of certain conversations. It was also a way to try and communicate with our remote site. The Sainsbury Library is actually 2 locations. There's the main Sainsbury Library inside the Said Business School's main building. But then the Said Business School also has an executive education center out 5 or 6 miles in a different area of Oxford. And there's a small library support team there as well. The libraries here create reading lists for the programs at a much higher level than anything I ever experienced back in the US. So we needed these extra people on site to support the reading list development for all the exec ed programs. So the team I have is 8 librarians and staff across these 2 locations under normal circumstances, and that being non-COVID lockdown. We'll get to some of the other issues related to that in a little bit. When I arrived, we continued to use the free version for probably another 3 to 5 months, but then realized that we were worried about losing some of our sort of institutional knowledge, as the free plan only allows for a total of 10,000 messages to be saved on sort of a rolling basis. And we realized pretty quickly that we were starting to use it much more heavily in a variety of different ways and didn't want to lose anything. So one example for how we use it is as it relates to inquiries. These are your reference questions. Here in the UK, they call it inquiries. But what you can see here when you're looking at the screen, several things are going on. Along the left-hand side are all of the channels that we've created. You can also start to see the direct messages that can be set up to specific people on the team or smaller groups on the team for private team conversations. The area in the middle here is the main body and content that is within the channel that you're looking at. So I'm in the inquiries channel, and this is, I've scrolled back for the last week or so. Over on the right is a running thread. So you can have running conversations that just run down through the channel, or you can reply directly to a thread and drop in information there. We do a fairly good job of keeping things in threads when it should be, but at times we get a little sloppy. The downside of that is some of the channels can get a little disorganized, but it's not anything that we can't deal with or that the search feature can handle. As far as inquiries are concerned specifically, it does several things for us. One, especially now, and over this last year, when there would only be one or two of us responding to any questions that were coming in through our email or our Twitter or any other of the locations where we would gather reference questions for, is that anyone who was trying to answer those questions could quickly throw a question into Slack, and the rest of us that were working on other projects were always paying attention to Slack and could chime in with a recommendation on where to go, or whether the question was more complicated and was going to need some more time. What it also has done, and what we've done at basically, I would say, semi-regular stretches of time over the course of any given year, is several of us will make sure that if we've gotten any really difficult or complicated questions privately in emails, what we'll do is we'll take the question and the answer and just post it into the inquiry channel so that everyone else on the team can see what that question was, what our thought process was on it, and then how we answered it. So that whenever anything like that starts to recur, we again have that sort of institutional knowledge that we're sharing. And then it also allows us all to search for the right answers and the better answers that we've come up with for certain problems, or especially when there's assignments that are team-based. There are several fairly significant team-based projects here that stretch across several of the courses. And this ensures that we're all answering in a very consistent way, because the first person or two that is seeing those students and answering that question is posting the information into our Slack channel for the inquiries. And then anyone else that comes up with anything that's added to it can then tack that on, so that there's a solid consistency of how we're handling these inquiries from one group of students to the next, over the course of several days or weeks when the assignments are in play. We use it for general communication. This is the case pre-COVID, even though with 6 of us here in a location where we're not that far apart, it effectively allowed us all to just sort of chatter with each other about important things or unimportant things, or conversations that we've had with other faculty, other staff from the business school, or meetings that we've had with other librarians across the Bodleian system. So it allowed us, even though, half the team was on one side of the library, the other half is on the other half of the library. It's not all that far, but it allows us to sort of work and chatter with each other, which keeps morale up. It makes the day go a little bit quicker. It keeps us all connected with each other. And in the COVID lockdown, it was even more so the case that as we were all locked away in our homes, it was much easier to chatter with each other. Several of the members of the team that were a little more remote or weren't living with anyone felt much more included and less alone during the lockdown, because we had this constant sort of communication and chatter going on. And you can see right here in this screenshot, this was a conversation that had been going, and there's an unread message for me there. So especially during COVID, we all got into the very strong habit of always, everybody says good morning as they sort of check in. Everybody says evening as we all sort of finish the day. That is purely used for just the camaraderie of it all, not for attendance or anything like that. We use it for small group communication within the small team that we are. So this is an example right here of a time when I had some questions and something I wanted to deal with just Hannah and Jessica. I knew Hannah was in a workshop, but I didn't want to have to wait until the three of us could actually have like a video conversation. I knew I could start the conversation, have Jessica start to react to it and think about it, knowing that once Hannah was back from her workshop, she would be able to catch up, see what we talked about. She and Jessica, who are one of my little sub teams, would then be able to discuss from their perspective what we should or shouldn't be doing. In this case, it's basically trying to identify some expensive reference books that we might try and purchase. So she could catch up really quickly, then realize that she didn't have access to the right document the next day. And the whole process would then just move along much faster than if I had waited to start fresh sometime on Wednesday. Things were already happening between this period of time. I know this has been used very heavily throughout the COVID lockdown, because it was easy to continue to work on projects and do other things that you were doing while then having these chat meetings with the small teams and the projects that we're working on. It is possible within Slack now to have video calls like Teams, like Zoom. Zoom and Teams are very heavily used across campus now. Those were the preferred choices. Zoom specifically by the Said Business School, Teams specifically by the Bodleian Libraries, especially throughout the whole COVID lockdown period. We chose not to migrate anything that we were doing over to Teams or Zoom within this context, because of all of that information and institutional knowledge of the Sainsbury Library team, and the history that was all within Slack. So we were probably one of the earliest within the Bodleian Libraries, and that's some 25 to 30 libraries across campus, that were using this type of synchronous, asynchronous, social communication tool way before the pandemic lockdown. It was, again, that decision that was made before I got here. And once I did arrive, we just really started to ramp up using it much more heavily in a variety of different ways. And you can see we have specific channels, and I can go back here to where you can see a few more. eGrove is the location that is remote. That's the executive ed program. They had their own channel, so that anything that we were talking about that was related to the eGrove Park location, it was inside just that channel. Inquiries were there. We had a separate channel that was focused on GDPR, which is the data protection that is necessary here in the UK. So some of these we would just post articles to or announcements from the university. Some things like resources related specifically to database issues. You'll see some others that I'll highlight in a minute. We have off and on started to use it for training, where I'll post little challenges or questions and let the rest of the team know they've got until the end of the week, the end of next week to solve that problem. And then I can then go in and sort of debrief what they found, and it's all captured within Slack. So that's a picture of one of my teammates, John, where we had a quick meeting. We basically needed to just kind of work through something, and it was better to talk it out. So we quickly talked it out. And also, to pause here for a second, the one thing that we have all done fairly well is, as much as we use this and as much as we chatter and communicate, it has not, from my perspective, in any way, not in any way diminished our actual face-to-face interaction, and especially obviously pre-COVID, that there were times when quick conversations would take place in Slack, and then there were other times any one of us would happily get up, walk across the library or walk into the next office over and have a quick face-to-face communication. It usually depended on what was the topic, how quickly you needed an answer, was there a reason for it to be saved in some way. Sometimes conversations that took place face-to-face between a couple of us, we would then say, hey, this was really good, everybody else should know about it. One of us would then decide to type up a quick summary and drop it into the right channel. So you kind of capture that conversation that maybe in a different arrangement would be lost. So you would just have to keep retelling people whenever you finally bumped into them. There are apps, and you'll see a screen in a minute, that can be sort of plugged into Slack. One specifically is Twitter. So our Twitter feed is fed into its own channel so that we're able to see what we're putting out and to keep an eye on it. And that is all set up programmatically, so it just happens automatically, and we can see as we schedule things through something like Hootsuite, we know it's popping up at the right time throughout the course of the day over the course of a week. And then we can then scroll back and see what we've been saying out publicly through that social media channel. One good example of what we've used this for is for maintenance tracking. So whenever anything happens, either with the IT issues within the library or equipment issues, lights are out, assuming you can see the tiny print on this, the first person that makes the call or identifies the problem can then post it into this, include the little transaction ID number, say for the IT help desk here at the Said Business School. And from there, as soon as it's resolved, we then can finally follow up with it and keep track of it. This is super handy so that nothing's ever dropped or lost, and we can always skim back through to make sure that, yes, the door to our annex room is finally fixed, even though it took probably weeks because they could not figure out what the problem was. So Slack itself has a whole variety of apps that can be plugged into it. Outlook, OneDrive, Giphy, and you'll see something about that in a minute. The Twitter that we've added, it's got some good flexibility. It's got some good customization to it. And it's really served a purpose both pre and post COVID extremely effectively. It is possible to work with people outside of the library in Slack by creating specific channels that are connected over. This is not something that we've done yet because no one that we really work with has jumped into it. And especially once COVID hit, then there was the big push towards Microsoft Teams and Zoom to solve some of the challenges of remote communication and document and project sharing. We're sort of still alone in our use of Slack, and that will probably remain the case for a long time. There is also our random channel. Our random channel is where a variety of things happen. It's where we post the things that get you through the day and through the week. Goofy pictures of Jessica when she was working from home and had 2 pheasants on the garage outside her window, basically watching her the entire time. We post, especially early on when we were all sent away on lockdown, the running challenge was to post pictures of either your own pets that you had doing something silly, or where I would walk around the neighborhood that I lived in, I would take pictures of all of the random cats that lived in the neighborhood. So it was, every couple of days, there was another like 2 or 3. Here's 3 more new cats that I've discovered as I've walked around. It keeps things very light. It maintains sort of that everything is not all about work. People would post humorous jokes and little videos, again, just to kind of keep a good cohesiveness and a sense of we're here surviving all of this as well. One of the other things that we would also do, and it's mostly covered up in this thread on this window here, but every Thursday, the Said Business School, the business school dean has a town hall where they present all kinds of information about the school, about what's going on. And this was always set up as our safe space to comment together and criticize and riff on what was being said. Sometimes it would generate questions and things that we would want to follow up on. Sometimes it would generate maybe a little meeting that the whole team would get together to discuss because of what we heard in the town hall meeting. Other times it was just us blowing off some steam, making fun of things that they were saying, or confused about why they thought things were being handled a certain way when we weren't really seeing it that way. And everyone, and we all knew that was where you could pretty much say anything that you wanted, and there was zero accountability. It was just, you're in the back of the room, just sort of chattering with each other about what's being presented. And again, it strengthens the whole team and how we communicate with each other and how we all trust each other significantly through all of this. So that's pretty much the whole thing with the screenshots. At this point, I will stop sharing, but if I need to share to go back to a screen, I can do that. So at this point, were there any questions?
Yeah, I think there was a couple questions that came up as you were talking. Our first question is from Julia Robbins. Does it mean that for every reference request, you have 2 threads going with the researcher and each other on Slack, and maybe also some tracking spreadsheet?
To a certain extent, I guess, yes. I mean, none of the requests come into Slack unless it's placed there by somebody on the team. So we have a separate email address. So questions that come into that start an email thread in our Sainsbury Library Outlook account. So that information, some of that is grabbed and carried back over into Slack, so it's kept everywhere else. What was the rest of the question? Read that one more time.
So the second, maybe also for some tracking spreadsheet.
No, I mean, we're not tracking anything on any kind of other tracking spreadsheet at all. The way the statistics are counted here are more on there's a specific time frame of predetermined weeks when statistics are tracked across the Bodleian. So we had it's called Scannell. We had a week like that, I think it was about 2 weeks ago. And that week we'll pay very close attention to how many requests we have received and answered, and the interactions with the students and the faculty, and report those for that week. In between that time, we're not tracking numbers at all. What we're doing is just grabbing the content and keeping it, is moving some of it over into Slack when necessary. But yes, there is still everything that's kept in the Sainsbury Library's email Outlook account. So I think that answers the question.
Great. Okay, our next question is from Karen Botkin. How long is the history saved?
I'm sorry, say again?
How long is the history saved?
The free plan is 10,000 messages. The standard plan that we're in is unlimited.
Okay, great.
So yeah, so it goes back as far as they went back. You know, if I wanted to scroll back to 2014 to see what they were saying before I ever worked here, I should be able to do that.
Great. Okay, and next question is from Jenny Wood. Slack versus Teams versus Zoom. Is it just a personal preference, or did you find a compelling reason other than the knowledge archive? Slack looks very similar in functionality to Teams. Right.
So what you have to remember is that back in 2014, when they started this, there was no Teams. And I don't think there was no Zoom either. So it wasn't that it was a personal choice, a personal preference or a local preference. I guess the local preference was they were experimenting with Slack, and they were also experimenting with Basecamp, and had been conducting some interactions and communication using Basecamp. That, especially when you look at Basecamp versus the original version of Slack, were very close to each other with similar types of sort of channels and chat communication. The video calling for Slack is a fairly new addition to it. So the reason why we kept it, or why we paid for it again, was even in 2018, there wasn't really any Teams as much anymore. The focus and the emphasis on Teams hadn't really spread across the Bodleian libraries yet at that point. And yeah, we wanted to keep all of that archived communication that we had been having for the previous years. Personally, if I had to compare them, Zoom is strictly for live interactions. It doesn't really have the chat feature. It doesn't have the text capture the same way. So that's different, has a different purpose for it. As far as the two together, I mean, Teams obviously integrates better into the whole Microsoft suite. And it is much more configurable, but you have to have the IT support to do that. For our arrangement internally to just one library with 2 locations, I think I would feel that Teams is just too much, too Microsoft messy, to be honest. If you can understand what I mean by Microsoft messy. Mm-hmm. And we have all become so very comfortable with Slack that it just never seemed like there was a need or a purpose to figure out how to roll over into Teams for what we're doing here within our library.
Great. Okay, our next question is from Saba. How is file management functionality in Slack? Any issues?
The file management is fair. It's easy to search. It's easy to basically favorite or bookmark certain threads or conversations that you want to go back to. We use it. Do we use it as an effective storage for files? Sort of. I mean, we have a local networked drive, our Q drive, that things get saved out to, that is backed up system wide with this. But for Slack, because of the running sort of threads and conversations, we throw a lot of documents in there so that everyone gets it right away. They know where it's at, and you then just need to remember, what it was called, or enough to know how to bring up that conversation thread or that document to bring it up. So I would say that the file management is fair, if that answers your question enough. And if not, press me for more, I guess.
All right, thank you. Another question from Saba. Has Slack replaced email internally, at least internally? If not, how is each tool utilized?
Yeah, I mean, to a certain extent, yes. Certain things, certain topics of maybe a certain seriousness or a certain reach will be sent by email. But I would say internally for the team, our emails to each other are greatly reduced because we're having these conversations. We have these channels where something can be posted into our team channel, and everyone on the team will see that as soon as they log into Slack. So it certainly reduces a lot of clutter within our email and busyness within our email, because it's all sort of set aside within our Slack communications. And we all get so much email as it is, that the fact that we can sort of maintain these two things in a somewhat separate way and know that it's comprehensive is a positive for what we feel like we're trying to do here. And was that the whole question?
That was the whole question, yes.
Okay.
All right. We got a couple thank yous from the question, so thank you, Hal, for that. Does anyone else have any questions for Hal? All right, last call. And thank you, Hal, for answering the question about the Microsoft Teams versus Slack. I had a similar question as well, as my institution has been using Microsoft Teams recently, and I find it very messy. So I'm always looking to see what the comparisons are. All right, I don't see any other questions, so I'm going to go ahead and pass this back over to Annette. Thank you, Hal.
Thank you again. So this will conclude our session. Like I mentioned before, this is part of our March Tech Tidbits series. So please keep an eye on our SLA programming for our future presentations. We do have another next week, I believe. Lee, do you happen to know the topic of that one?
Yes, actually next week, March 26th at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, we're going to be doing Microsoft Teams.
Excellent. Yeah, so we can compare our knowledge of Teams to what we saw in Slack this morning. So with that being said, thank you again so much, Hal, for presenting and teaching us more about Slack. This presentation was recorded, so it should be available relatively soon, and that will be posted on SLA's open forum page, as well as the LMD page as well. So definitely keep an eye on that. Thank you all for tuning in. And again, doubly thank you again, Hal.
Sure.
Have a wonderful weekend. Thank you all. Have a good day.
Everybody, thank you.